Hello, this is Jenny at Designs with Paper. Thank you so much for stopping by today. My card video today is kind of a throwback. I have a little bit of heat resist, embossing resist, and masking and all kinds of stuff. And it is the second time I started this card because, well, I didn't measure very well the first time. I have some Gina K masking magic paper, a piece of cream colored cardstock that is 4¼ by 5½ inches, and I have this scripty background stamp that I will be using. I've also picked this silhouette stamp out of my collection. It's an old one, and I'm not quite sure which image I'm going to use yet. And I have a set of ovals dies from Stampin' Up. So on take 2, I cut down that piece of masking paper to be the same size as my cardstock. So 5½ inches tall by 4¼ inches wide. And I centered the oval die into the center and cut it out. And now I am going to stamp that scripty stamp just in that open space. So a little trick I learned watching Jennifer McGuire is I am going to put my stamp in the MISTI first. And there you go. See, back of the paper. Paper has two sides. It's always reusable. I am going to then tape my paper to the inside of my MISTI and then flip it over so that I can stamp it that way. It's probably not as big of a deal with this style of card because I've masked off the outside edges, so it wouldn't matter if the background stamp went all the way from top to bottom, side to side. However, normally when you're stamping a whole card front, you know this is a good trick to make sure that you don't have that little bit of edge left over where your stamp doesn't quite meet the edge of your paper. So I am just taking my rag here so that my hands can glide up and down the lid of my MISTI. And there is a huge spot right there at the top that did not quite get enough ink or pressure. And as I am looking at this, I think my stamp is upside down, but that doesn't matter. I can fix that because this is just a card panel, not the actual card base. That would be so worse. So yeah, I'm missing a little pressure there. And I'm just going to go back and add it back in and voila, everything looks great. Okay, so now that I've cleaned off that stamp and got it out of my MISTI, I am going to remove my mask and you will see that I have that oval with the script in the middle. Now I want to add the silhouette image. I am going to be stamping this in clear embossing powder. And I want to stamp the image on there twice. So there's a little bit of finagling. Where do I want this to be? How do I want it, I want to be able to move the paper over to get the second stamping. So then I have to figure out, it's all eyeballed. There's nothing scientific about this. I am not necessarily a ruler measuring perfectionist. I'm all about the eyeballing tool of measurement. I will take my embossing bag, my embossing buddy, whatever it's called, and put a little bit of powder on the top of that card base. I don't want the oils from my fingers or if there's any ink that's still a little bit wet, to hold on to the embossing powder. So now I've taken my Versamark ink pad and inked up that stamp rather, and I'm just going to use that rag, my microfiber cloth, to add a little bit of even pressure onto that stamp. And then I am going to slide the cardstock slightly to the right so I can get a second impression. I'm going to slide it about an inch over, and that second stamping will go off of the oval. Wow, that was weird. Off of the oval, but it will still be inside the card parameters or the card shape itself. Like I said, I am stamping this with Versamark ink, and then I will be using some clear embossing powder. When you want to do an emboss resist technique, what you're doing is embossing in white or clear embossing powder and then putting other ink over the top, and those flowers will eventually stand out from the background. And because I'm using clear embossing powder, you will see the script through the stamped image. It's really quite a neat trick. I think there are many, many, many crafters, card makers and scrapbookers and mixed media artists that have been lulled into this paper crafting by the technique of heat embossing. It is so cool. And on another video I have, you can actually see the embossing taking shape. It's a little hard to see right now because I'm using a light colored cardstock and clear embossing powder. But there is something super cool about watching that, I don't know, it's basically plastic, I think, embossing powder melt and create this shape. It really is cool. So now for the resist part. I have the same color ink that I used for the scripty background stamp. It is a Stampin' Up! Color, I think, Crumb Cake. And I am going to blend. Now, the blending part I've sped up double speed. And the drying part I sped up double speed. Everything else was real time so far. But I'm going to blend this Crumb Cake ink onto the card base. And I want to keep the ink in that bottom left-hand corner. Like if I put a diagonal line from the top left to the bottom right, I kind of want to keep most of the ink to the bottom of that diagonal angle. And because the flowers aren't showing through with the brown tan as much, I'm going to add this light green. No idea what color it is. I didn't look. I just grabbed a light green. And now you can see that those flowers are starting to pop through the blending. There is still a little bit of blending work that needs to take place and a little bit of a cleanup trick I will show you here. But you can see that I have now those two groups of flowers stamped together, and you can see the flowers sitting on top of that script, the stamped script inside that oval. So I'm going to take the tan, the light brown, crumb cake, whatever color it is, and just go up the edges again to kind of finish off, even out. I don't know. I just kept blending until I felt like it was done. Have you ever done that? Just kept going until you, okay, it's done. You know, I read somewhere once, I think it was Coco Chanel said that when you get dressed, take off the last thing you put on and then you're done. Well, okay, so now I'm taking off the last thing I put on. The trick to emboss resist is to then, wow, English, go back over the embossed image with a dry tissue or wipe to wipe off the ink that's sitting on top of that embossing powder. Okay, so for the finishing of this card, I wanted to cut it down so that it was slightly smaller than a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card, a regular US A2 size card. So I pulled out these waffle flower A2 layering dies, and I'm not centering it. I don't want it centered because then I would cut off all of that blending. I'm just kind of deciding, okay, yeah, I want this. And that will make the oval part probably not right in the middle, but I feel like I don't care. I feel like I decided it was going to look good no matter what. I am taking that brush without inking it up again and adding a little bit of ink to the edges of that. And then I will wipe off this embossed image again. Now I'm going to go really old school here. So I have a piece of green cardstock. It's very light green, like that ink pad. Probably, gosh, I don't even know the colors of the Stampin' Up! Paper and inks anymore. Back in the day when I first started, that was my go-to company. It was where I got all of my things, but that was quite a few years ago, and there have been many, many companies come onto the scene since then, and I love lots of different product. Anyway, so this card base, even though you can't tell in the video, my lights are kind of blowing it out, it is a pale green. And I am going to take this card front and go old school here. I'm going to go with ribbon, and not just ribbon and a ribbon slider. How many of you card makers who started card making 15 years ago, 12 years ago, 20 years ago, have these ribbon slides still in your stash? I had completely forgotten about them until I decided that this card needed ribbon. Okay. I did not ever use ribbon on cards a lot. It was just not my style. But I felt like the design of this card was just enough old school that it could pull it off. I didn't make a big, huge bow. I didn't make it super dimensional. I just added that really thin, it's a seam binding ribbon, so it's a really thin ribbon. And this, I should have sped this up. Holy cow. Me fidgeting with this ribbon, trying to get it through the ribbon slider is a little bit torturous. Sorry, guys. My old eyes just don't work as good as they used to, and it took me a few tries to get that ribbon into that slider. Anyways, now I have to figure out where on the card I want that slider to end. And I decided I wanted it again in that bottom left-hand corner. It just felt like that's where it needed to be. So I am going to use the old trick of Scotch taping my ribbon to the back of the cardstock. I was never really, I guess it's because I'm cheap. I don't know. I never wanted to wrap ribbon all the way around the card because then you're using ribbon you could use on a different project. I always just used that trick of taping one side to the back and taping the other side to the back and saving myself a little bit of ribbon. But then I never used ribbon on my cards hardly ever, so I'm not sure what I was saving the ribbon for. I'm just a ribbon hoarder. I don't know. Okay, so we have one side on there, and I finally figured out where it's going to go. And I am going to flip it over and tape this other side down. And you can see looking at the back of that I did a terrible job on my first go out getting things centered, even before I cut the card base or the card panel down a little bit. Anyways, just chatter, chatter, chatter. So there we go. Here is my card front. I'm going to fix with the ribbon just a little bit and get it lined up. And now I am going to attach this card panel to my card base, and I am just going to use my ATG gun. I am going to slide it right down over the top of that ribbon, which it does really well because the tape is there, and that will also help hold the ribbon in place. So I don't have to worry about the ribbon coming out or sliding out because now it has been taped down with multiple adhesives. And I will center that panel on the front of this lime green, not lime green, pale green card base. And that is my kickback card. It is a little bit old school. I kind of like how it turned out. However, like always, when you're using ribbon, you need to add a little bit of adhesive down behind that ribbon so that it doesn't slide around. So I have dug through my drawer. Yes, I had to dig because I don't use these very often, and found my glue dots. Yeah, those probably have been in my drawer longer than I've had some of my kids because it was never an adhesive that I reached for first. So anyways, I am going to slide a couple of glue dots underneath that ribbon, and there you go. Give me a thumbs up, share my card, share my channel, and thanks for stopping by.